Hi students, I am Joy Chandu. I am the teachers trainer of Shiliguri Torai B.Ed College. Today I am going to deliver a lecture on social mobility, which is a topic which is included in B.Ed 4th semester Knowledge and Curriculum Part 2. And I think that in our previous classes we have already covered the areas which is very much related to the social classes, the differences, the elitism, the meritocracy, etc. And now today I am going to discuss about the topic which is social mobility. Social mobility, what is social mobility? When we are discussing about the social mobility, at first we must have to know about the term what is mobility called by. The mobility stands for shapes, changes and movement. Mobility stands for shift, changes and movement. The change may be one place to another place, one social strata to another social strata, and it may be good and it may be bad. And the prefix social, along with the mobility, it would imply that people or individual occupying a social position move one position to one status to another status. The people, the individual who are very much related in the social system just try to move from one status to another status is called by social mobility. Just write down some definitions about the social mobility. Just write down some definitions about the social mobility. Social mobility is the movement of a person. Social mobility is the movement of a person or persons from one social status to another. Social mobility is the movement of a person or persons from one social status to another social status. Social mobility refers to the change in the status not only of the individuals but also of the groups in relation to the social stratifications. And now I am just telling you about some features of social mobility. Just note it down. The features of social mobility. There is always social mobility in both directions. But the degree is subject to changes. And there can be different trains for different status. That means that there is always social mobility in both directions. That is, social mobility we can use the term not only for the good but also for the bad. This is meant by social mobility in both directions. Next point. There is less downward than the upward mobility. For the following reasons. That means that in the term social mobility, we will be able to see that the decreasement of social mobility, the decreasement in social status is quite shorter than the increasement in the social status. The reasons is that there can be no downward mobility from the lowest status. There can be no downward mobility from the lowest status. Downward mobility only occurs in the agricultural system. Downward mobility only occurs on the agricultural systems. Mobility is usually gradual. Mobility is usually gradual rather than the radical. Mobility is usually gradual, and expectations do occur but not very frequently. Mobility is very gradual. What's the term latent? What's the meaning latent in these words? Just think about it. In our previous 15 years ago, we was not accustomed to the system of mobile, to the system of online classes, but now these days we are very much accustomed with this kind of system. That's the social mobility. That's the gradual rather than the radical. That's the social mobility. Next point. Upward mobility from the lower status has been greatly facilitated by higher education and vocational training. Upward mobility from the lower social status has been greatly facilitated by higher education and vocational training. That means that upward mobility only possible when we will be able to take the proper education and we will be able to take the proper vocational training. Only then the upward social mobility will be possible. Next point. The degree of competition depends on the class for which a person competes. The degree of competition depends on the class for which a person competes. That means that in our previous classes we already have seen that there are the different type of classes: upper class, middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, etc. Now the competition between the classes, that he or she belong to the upper class. This is for why I must have to achieve that particular class. That's the competition which is latent behind the classes. Next point. The rate of mobility increases if a system is expanding. The rate of mobility increases if a system is expanding and decreases if it remains stable. That's the natural concept. If it is an ongoing process, then the mobility is possible, but if it has been stopped, then the mobility will also be stopped. And this concept is very much related with as a river. If the water flows on the river, then it will be a river, but when the water will stop its flowing to the river, then it will be a stagnant pond. That's the type of social mobilities. Now I will tell you the different types of social mobilities. Now I will tell you about the different types of social mobilities. There are various types of social mobilities. At first, just write it, just note it down. The types of social mobilities. Horizontal social mobility. Horizontal social mobility, vertical social mobility, upward social mobility, downward social mobility, intra-generational social mobility, intergenerational social mobility, and territorial social mobility. I am just repeat it. That's the very important for you. The types of social mobility: horizontal social mobility, vertical social mobility, upward social mobility, downward social mobility, intergenerational social mobility, intragenerational social mobility, and territorial social mobility. What is horizontal social mobility? Horizontal social mobility means when a person or an individual just move from left to right or right to left. That is called by horizontal social mobility. And which kind of example it is? Suppose you just think about it. I am a teacher and I am just coming from Bardhaman, and in this connection I am just change my positions from Bardhaman to Siliguri. That's my horizontal mobility, but my gradation has not been upgraded. That I am a teacher. I was a teacher at the Bardhaman and now I am also a teacher. That's my social status. My social status has not been changed, but my social position, but my territorial position has been changed. That's the horizontal social mobility. I have came from Bardhaman to Siliguri, one place to another place. That's the horizontal social mobility. Vertical social mobility. What is vertical social mobility? When a person try to upgrade himself or herself from lower status to upper status, or upper status to or try to degrade himself or herself from upper status to lower status, although it is not possible for a man for a woman that to decrease his or her particular social status. So the only concept is that when a person is trying to upgrade himself from lower status to upper status, there's the vertical social mobility. Suppose I am a primary teacher and after giving the examination I became a professor, and it's the change of my social status, and it's the valid relevant example of vertical social mobility. Upward social mobility. When a person is trying to upgrade himself or herself, then it is called by upgradation or upgraded social mobility. And example is that he or she may not be able to change his or her caste, but his or her economic and political power has moved upward. The class has not been changed. Instead of that, he or she is just trying to change his economic status and his or her political status. It's called by upward social mobility. And what's the downward social mobility? When a person loses his place due to the proper education, due to the proper higher education, is called by downward social mobility. Is a proper example of downward social mobility. Thank you.